Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to my partner, Congressman Gabe Amo, who's joining from Rhode Island, where it's very rainy right now. Here in Arizona, we hit 118 degrees yesterday. Gabe Amo and I are joining up on this event today because I am the lead Democrat on the subcommittee that oversees FEMA. He is the lead Democrat on the subcommittee that oversees the National Weather Service and NOAA. As a father, my heart breaks for the families in Texas who've been devastated by these horrific floods, parents grieving children, community mourning neighbors, hundreds of lives forever changed. We are keeping them in our thoughts today, and we owe them action. I want to begin by saying thank you to the brave camp counselors, first responders, Good Samaritans, all who have risked their own lives to rescue hundreds over the past week. Their courage has saved countless lives and helped families find closure, even in this tragic situation. And we are deeply grateful to the dedicated FEMA employees, National Weather Service forecasters, and activated volunteers who are doing everything they can to help the survivors. They are showing up for Americans in crisis, despite enormous challenges and despite leadership in Washington that is failing them. And let me be clear, David Richardson, the senior official performing the duties of FEMA administrator, he has been missing in action. He hasn't even traveled to Kerr County to meet with survivors or coordinate recovery efforts. He hasn't held a press conference or made any public statement acknowledging the lives lost. This is a failure of leadership, plain and simple. And then there's Secretary Kristi Noem. Yesterday, she said that FEMA should, quote, be eliminated as it exists today, unquote, and shared reasons why it should be replaced with a system that leaves disaster response entirely to state and local communities. Secretary Noem's remarks are at best deeply misleading and at worst deliberate misinformation. Let me take her claims apart one by one and show how misguided and reckless they really are. First, Secretary Noem claims, quote, federal emergency management should be state and locally led, unquote. That's already how it works. And that's exactly how it is working right now in Texas. State and local communities lead the initial response, but FEMA exists because even the most capable states can be overwhelmed by federal disasters. When floodwaters rise or wildfires rage, FEMA brings national resources, personnel, and expertise that no single community can muster alone. That federal partnership saves lives. It's an important tool in the arsenal. Second, she says that over the years, FEMA has been too slow to respond at the federal level. Here's the reality. FEMA employees and volunteers, they're on the ground in Texas right now, working tirelessly despite being undercut by their own hiring freezes and budget cuts. In fact, just yesterday, it was reported that Noem's own micromanaging of FEMA grants delayed urban search and rescue teams by 72 hours. In a crisis, hours matter, minutes matter. She waited days to act. FEMA is at its best when led by competent administrators, and it's at its worst when political cronies are put in charge. That's not a flaw in the agency. It's a failure of leadership. And yes, FEMA can always do better, especially as climate change creates more and frequent and severe disasters. Stable, predictable funding from Congress would help them at least keep pace. But instead, this administration is deliberately cutting off resources, first for preventative measures like NOAA and the National Weather Service, and now even to FEMA's disaster response. It's like slashing the tires on a fire truck and then complaining it's slow to arrive at the fire. Third, Secretary Noem argues FEMA, quote, needs to be eliminated and remade into a responsive agency, unquote. But gutting FEMA won't make it more responsive, just like getting rid of it won't make disaster response better. It leaves communities to fend for themselves in their darkest hour. That's not reform, that's abandonment. She points to past failures over the years why the agency must go, but she ignores thousands of times FEMA has delivered in hurricanes, floods, and wildfires, providing shelter, rebuilding homes, and helping communities recover. Those successes far outweigh the failures she cherry picks. Finally, She suggests that the response to Texas so far is, quote, exactly how President Trump imagined FEMA would operate, unquote. If this administration thinks delayed staff deployment and resources, burdensome and unnecessary red tape, and a FEMA acting administrator who is MIA in the face of over hundreds of dead and countless others missing is a model response, they have misjudged what a robust response should look like. These comments by the secretary aren't just ill-timed, coming while rescue operations are still underway. They are profoundly insulting. They insult FEMA employees working around the clock, local and state officials depending on federal support, and most of all, the Texans who deserve a government that shows up when it's needed most. So as the ranking member of the House subcommittee that oversees FEMA, I take seriously my responsibility to hold this agency and leadership accountable. And I want to thank ranking members Rick Larson and Zoe Lofgren for their leadership and commitment to ensuring Texans have the resources they need, as well as Leader Jeffries and Whip Clark for their great leadership. This commitment to both preventing tragedy and responding to tragedy is why Congressman Amo and I sent an oversight letter to FEMA and NOAA demanding answers. Key questions such as, why weren't critical National Weather Service vacancies filled before the disaster season? Why hasn't FEMA deployed a robust federal response to Texas? And is Secretary Noem's new policy requiring her personal approval for grants over $100,000 slowing down desperately needed aid? Every tragedy and every response is and should be a learning opportunity for the American people. Extreme weather is only becoming more frequent and more severe, from wildfires to extreme heat in Arizona to flash floods in Texas. The federal government must be fully staffed, fully funded, and fully prepared to respond to these disasters. Texans and all Americans deserve a FEMA that is strong, capable, and ready on day one, not one deliberately undermined by its own leadership. As we continue to pray for all of those affected, House Democrats will continue to relentlessly demand transparency and accountability for and on behalf of the American people, especially those experiencing unimaginable tragedy. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague and friend, Congressman Gabe Amo. He is the ranking member on the Science, Space, and Technology Subcommittee, which oversees NOAA and the National Weather Service. Congressman.
Thank you, Congressman Stanton, for your leadership and partnership in this important response. You know, this week, the fact of the matter is, we have seen the consequences of the interlocking problem of Republicans ignoring the warning signs of the growing climate crisis and failing to deliver when Americans need them the most, especially after emergencies. You know, we are continuing to see the impact of extreme weather across this country, from coast to coast. We are seeing impacts, even right here in my state of Rhode Island, leaving thousands without power and having thunderstorms of great impact. And we saw the impact, quite unfortunately, when the devastating flash floods in Texas took hundreds of lives of campers, of counselors, of everyday people, and the continuing efforts to find those missing people. And so I can't get too much further without expressing my deep condolences, my sympathies, my thoughts with the survivors and the families of the victims. I'm, really grateful that at these times we have Americans who exhibit a great amount of resilience, a great amount of commitment to their fellow citizen, and do everything they can to respond. And so those first responders, those forecasters, the everyday people who showed up when their community needed them the most, thank you for exemplifying what it means to be a great American. But the challenge here is this flood is another example of how extreme weather can upend lives and ravage communities. It's really, at its core, a reminder for all of us to be prepared. And if this isn't a wake-up call, this is a clear example of why we need a well-staffed, well-resourced National Weather Service and Federal Emergency Management Agency. I've seen lots of extreme weather incidents in my career. I previously worked in the White House in the Department of Intergovernmental Affairs, leading response and coordinating with communities across this country, showing the interlocking work that happens at the federal, state, and local level. And Americans rely on specific federal actions and federal resources, from the forecasters at the National Weather Service to the emergency response personnel, to keep people safe when these disasters strike. However, what we've seen from the Trump administration is everything to undermine those efforts, that history of being responsive. Look, the National Weather Service data that has been a hallmark of preparation for incidents is vital to protecting lives, the livelihoods, frankly, the property of Americans. And despite this clear truth that they are the experts, Donald Trump has spent the last 6 months hacking this agency to bits. And so, thanks to the Trump effort to purge the federal workforce of qualified employees, the Weather Service has been cut by 15%. 15%, that's 600 employees out of a workforce of 4,200. And these people are technical experts, meteorologists, hydrologists, electrical technicians. They're experts who work to keep Americans safe, full stop. But, after the Trump's initial crusade, my great ranking member on the Science Committee, Zoe Lofgren, and I demanded that the National Weather Service end the staffing crisis and lift the hiring freeze. Trump's response failed to meet the moment. We said there could be a bad day that we would have been able to avert. Now, the National Weather Service issued a limited exemption for roughly 125 positions. That's less than a quarter of the staff 37 days ago. But we don't even know if with this exemption, these positions have actually been filled. And the challenge here is it doesn't stop at attacking the forecasters from the Trump administration, right? The administration has put forward a proposed budget for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that oversees the National Weather Service, and slashes it by $2.2 billion. Secretary Noam on the DHS side says the administration is working to upgrade the technology to ensure the public receives a greater warning time. What does working to the technology mean after the fact of the tragedies that this country has experienced, that those people in Texas have experienced? And the Trump administration's budget is doing the opposite, again, of those words of the secretary, which shutter the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research and the National Severe Storms Lab. Let me say that again. The National Severe Storms Lab would be shuttered. That plays a critical role in predicting and understanding flash floods and other severe weather, so we can avert challenges in the future. We can't upgrade technology if Trump eliminates funding for research. We've got to be able to do that work. And refusing to study extreme weather isn't going to stop disasters and help families. Look, it's just going to undermine our ability to be prepared and save lives. And so, as the ranking member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee Environment Subcommittee, I've been working very hard with my colleagues across the Congress and on the committee to defend the National Weather Service from Trump's attacks. I joined ranking members Lofgren and Sykes to demand Commerce Secretary Lutnick testify before the committee, right? There is an important function for that secretary. I want to see if he is up to the task of responding here. We need an explanation of how these staffing cuts have hurt forecasters' ability to keep Americans safe. And I'm also working with ranking members Larson and Lofgren and my good friend, ranking member Stanton, to demand answers from NOAA and FEMA, as he shared, on this response, this anemic response to the tragedy. And we are learning more every day. And as we learn more, we keep those families who have experienced unspeakable loss in the light. We owe it to them, underscoring that we owe it to them for a rigorous assessment of everything that happened before, everything that has happened during, and everything that's happening right now in this response. And I'll tell you this, I believe it as fact that we cannot handicap the National Weather Service and FEMA, because there are incidents that we are responsible for protecting this country from, and we are up to that task alongside our leadership in the House Democratic caucus. So thank you for the opportunity to be on, and I think we are transitioning to questions.
Thank you so much. If anyone has questions, please use the raise hand function and I will unmute you. We do have one question in the chat. It is, do you think Secretary Noem and Mr. Richardson should appear before Congress to answer questions about the federal response?
The answer is, of course, that is their constitutional obligation to appear before Congress for oversight. And Secretary Noem in particular has a lot of answering to do. First, the policy that she personally has to approve any contract over $100,000. How has that slowed down the response? CNN reported yesterday that search and rescue people who should have been on the ground, maybe even before the terrible flooding, were only there 72 hours after the terrible floods in Kerr County. That's inexplicable. That is terrible. And she has a lot of explaining to do. Second, this circular argument that they continue to make, that they want to eliminate FEMA because they think that state and localities should take the lead on federal emergencies for natural disaster emergencies. The reason why that argument is circular is the entire rationale for FEMA is to help cities and communities and states when an emergency goes beyond their capacity to answer. That's the whole reason why FEMA exists. Of course, state and localities take the lead initially. That's always been the case. And FEMA is there when a national emergency declaration is issued to come in and provide additional support. That's because Americans want to support their fellow Americans in their time of need. That's the reason why FEMA exists from the very beginning. And oh, by the way, they've also, for some reason, stopped the grant making process because FEMA has another purpose, which is to help communities plan for these terrible tragedies in advance so that the response can be more vigorous and swift after the natural emergency. That whole planning process, the grants for planning, helping communities plan for these disasters, is not happening right now. So she owes a significant amount of explanation to the American Congress and the American people as to why they're attempting to dismantle FEMA and their anemic response to the current tragedy in Texas.
And I would only add there that I associate myself with all the comments of my colleague and say that this is really an episode that requires every single hand involved in the decision making to face significant accountability. The only way that we prevent harm to Americans going forward is that we have the leadership of this administration who in their grand wisdom have taken away capacities for the federal government to support communities across the country. They need to justify it. And I guarantee you here, they will not be able to defend these actions. This should be led by the professionals in the emergency management space who have called for a reversal of some of these actions that we've seen from the administration. So I share the comment of my colleague and say they need to show up and they need to deliver answers. And out of those, we need real solutions, funded solutions that prevent our communities from having the struggles that they've experienced.
And the question didn't directly result, the question was about Kristi Noem, but the acting FEMA administrator, Mr. Richardson, he's missing in action. What is going on? Where is he? He has not appeared on the ground in Texas. He's not held a single press conference. He's not briefed members of Congress. He's not been heard from in one of the worst tragedies in American history in terms of loss of life from flooding. It is unacceptable that the head of the Federal Emergency Management Administration is nowhere to be seen. What type of leadership is this? What type of management is this? Is Secretary Nome so micromanaging this agency? That micromanaging that, as was reported, has led to significantly slow down in response in a time of emergency. Do they have so lack of faith in the administrator that they've hired to lead this agency that they completely have bypassed them and put them off on the sidelines? It's completely unacceptable, and explanations are owed to Congress and the American people.